The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine campus of Westfield Academy, where perfectly manicured lawns stretched between Gothic stone buildings that screamed old money and older traditions. Students in pressed uniforms walked in clusters, their conversations punctuated by the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to question your place in the world. Marcus Thompson adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and shifted his worn backpack as he navigated through the crowd. At 17, he was tall and lean, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His scholarship student ID badge caught the light as he walked, marking him as different in a place where being different was dangerous. The collision was inevitable. As Marcus rounded the corner near the main academic building, he walked straight into Tyler Morrison, the golden boy of Westfield's social hierarchy. Tyler's perfectly styled blonde hair and designer uniform made him look like he'd stepped out of a prep school catalog. Behind him stood his ever-present entourage, Brandon Chen, whose family's tech fortune bought him acceptance, and Jake Sullivan, whose father's law firm had defended half the corrupt politicians in the state. "Watch where you're going, scholarship boy," Tyler sneered, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty that comes from a lifetime of unchallenged privilege. The collision had caused Tyler to spill his artisanal coffee, and the dark stain spread across his white shirt like spilled blood. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the fight-or-flight response that had been his constant companion since starting at Westfield 6 months ago. "Sorry," he said quietly, reaching for his own books that had scattered across the stone pathway. But Tyler wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You know what your problem is? You think you belong here, but we both know you don't. You're just here because the school needed to fill their diversity quota." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Around them, other students had stopped to watch, their faces showing the kind of fascinated horror people display when witnessing a car accident. Some pulled out phones, but Marcus knew none of them would intervene. "I said I was sorry," Marcus repeated, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. Years of martial arts training had taught him to control his breathing, to find the calm center even in chaos. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. A warrior's greatest weapon is not his fist, but his mind. Tyler smirked, sensing weakness where there was actually incredible strength. "Sorry doesn't clean my shirt. Maybe you should learn to use that big brain of yours to watch where you're walking." Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Marcus gathered his books with deliberate calm, his movements precise and controlled. What Tyler and his friends didn't know was that Marcus had been studying martial arts since he was 7 years old. Not the flashy tournament-style fighting that rich kids learned at expensive dojos, but the real thing, the kind taught in community centers by old masters who understood that martial arts were about more than just physical technique. His grandmother, Sarah Thompson, had enrolled him after his parents died in a car accident. She'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his training, believing that a young black boy needed to know how to defend himself in a world that would constantly test his resolve. Master Chen, no relation to Brandon despite the shared surname, had become like a second father to Marcus, teaching him not just how to fight, but when not to fight. As Marcus walked away from the confrontation, he could hear Tyler's laughter echoing behind him. The sound followed him into his first period advanced physics class, where he sat in the back row, the only black student in a sea of privileged white faces. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, the physics teacher, was one of the few faculty members who seemed to genuinely care about Marcus's academic success. She'd been the one to recommend him for the scholarship program, having noticed his exceptional performance in her Saturday science enrichment program at the community center. "Today we're going to explore the principles of momentum and energy transfer," Dr. Harrison announced, her eyes briefly meeting Marcus's. She knew about the incident in the hallway. News traveled fast in a school like Westfield, especially when it involved conflict between the scholarship kids and the legacy students. Marcus threw himself into the lesson, his mind finding refuge in the elegant simplicity of physics equations. Force equals mass times acceleration. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The laws of physics were fair and impartial, unlike the social dynamics that governed his daily life at Westfield. But even in class, he couldn't escape Tyler's influence. During group work, Marcus found himself consistently excluded from the popular student circles. When he tried to contribute to discussions, his ideas were dismissed or ignored, until a white student repeated the same concept and received praise. The pattern continued throughout the morning. In AP History, Tyler made a show of moving his chair away when Marcus sat nearby. In English literature, Brandon accidentally knocked Marcus's notebook to the floor. Each incident was small, seemingly insignificant, but they accumulated like drops of water, eventually wearing away stone. Lunch was the worst part of the day. The cafeteria was a carefully orchestrated social ecosystem where every table represented a different tier of the hierarchy. Marcus usually sat alone near the windows, using the time to read or catch up on homework. But today, Tyler and his crew decided to make him their entertainment. "Look, it's Stephen Hawking," Tyler announced loudly as he approached Marcus's table, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "I heard you're some kind of genius. Is that true?" Marcus looked up from his sandwich, his grandmother's words echoing in his mind. "Never let them see you sweat." He kept his voice level. "I just work hard." "Work hard," Jake repeated mockingly. "That's what you people always say, isn't it? Like hard work is some kind of virtue. My dad says the problem with scholarship kids is they think effort matters more than breeding." The casual racism hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists under the table, muscle memory from years of training causing his body to shift into a fighting stance even while sitting. But he forced himself to remain calm. Master Chen had taught him that a true warrior chooses his battles carefully. Maybe if you spent less time running your mouth and more time studying, you'd understand the material better. Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying just enough edge to make Tyler's friends shift uncomfortably. The insult hit its mark. Tyler's face flushed red, his privileged worldview unable to process being intellectually challenged by someone he considered beneath him. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me," Marcus replied, standing slowly. Even without his martial arts training, he would have been intimidating. He was nearly 6 feet tall and had the kind of quiet intensity that made people nervous. With his training, he was dangerous in ways that Tyler couldn't even imagine. But Tyler was too stupid and too privileged to recognize the warning signs. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're going to regret that, nerd. I'm going to make your life hell." "My life is already hell," Marcus replied with a sad smile. "You just don't have the imagination to make it worse." The comeback stunned Tyler into silence, but Marcus could see the rage building in his eyes. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you're enjoying this story of courage and standing up to bullies, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you would do in this situation. The afternoon brought new torments. In chemistry lab, Tyler accidentally knocked over Marcus's experiment, destroying hours of careful work. The teacher, Mr. Peterson, barely looked up from his desk. "Accidents happen," he said dismissively. "Start over." Marcus spent the rest of the period rebuilding his experiment, while Tyler smirked from across the room. The message was clear. The teachers wouldn't protect him. He was on his own. After school, Marcus walked to his job at the community center, where he helped teach younger kids basic self-defense. The center was in the heart of his neighborhood, a world away from Westfield's manicured perfection. Here, the buildings were older, the paint was peeling, and the dreams were harder won. But there was also something that Westfield lacked: genuine community. Master Chen was waiting for him in the small dojo, a converted classroom with mirrors on one wall and mats covering the floor. At 73, the old man moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his entire life studying the art of movement. His hair was white, his face lined with wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp as obsidian. "You're troubled," Master Chen observed as Marcus changed into his training clothes. It wasn't a question. Marcus had learned long ago that trying to hide his emotions from Master Chen was pointless. The old man could read people like open books. "School," he said simply. "The privileged boys are testing you." Master Chen nodded. "This is not unexpected. A tree that grows tallest attracts the most wind." They began with basic forms, the familiar movements helping Marcus find his center. As he moved through the ancient patterns, he felt the tension leaving his body. This was his sanctuary, the place where he could be himself without apology or explanation. "Tell me about today," Master Chen said as they moved into sparring practice. Marcus recounted the incidents while they fought, his words punctuated by the sound of blocked strikes and redirected energy. Master Chen listened without judgment, occasionally offering gentle corrections to Marcus's technique. "You showed restraint," the old man said finally. "This is good. But restraint without purpose is merely fear. You must decide what you are willing to fight for. I just want to graduate and get out of there, Marcus replied, throwing a combination that Master Chen deflected effortlessly. Running is not always the answer, Master Chen said, his movements becoming more aggressive, forcing Marcus to adapt. Sometimes we must stand and fight, not for ourselves, but for those who cannot fight. The lesson continued for another hour, each technique building on the last. Master Chen taught him new applications of familiar movements, showing him how to use an opponent's strength against them. But more importantly, he taught him about the warrior's mind, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to see opportunity in adversity, to find strength in apparent weakness. As they cooled down, Master Chen spoke of his own experiences growing up as a Chinese immigrant in America. I was different too, he said quietly. I learned that the world will test you, but it is how you respond to those tests that defines who you are. Marcus walked home through his neighborhood, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The contrast between his world and Westfield's couldn't have been starker, but he was beginning to understand that he belonged to both. The question was, how could he use that position to create change? At home, his grandmother was waiting with dinner and homework help. Sarah Thompson was a small woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. She'd raised Marcus single-handedly after his parents' death, working as a nurse at the county hospital while putting herself through law school part-time. She was now a paralegal at a civil rights law firm, fighting for justice in the courtroom the same way she'd taught Marcus to fight for it in life. How was school? She asked, though her knowing look suggested she already suspected the answer. Marcus told her about the day's events, watching her face grow stern as he described Tyler's behavior. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Baby, she said finally, you know I didn't send you to that school to make friends. I sent you there to get an education that would open doors. But I also sent you there to show them what we're made of. You represent more than just yourself. You represent everyone who looks like you, everyone who's been told they don't belong. But what if I can't take it anymore? Marcus asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in his chest. What if I lose control? Sarah took his hands in hers, her touch gentle but firm. You won't lose control because you know who you are. You're a Thompson. We don't break, and we don't back down. But we're also smart enough to pick our battles. That night, Marcus lay in bed thinking about Master Chen's words about fighting for those who cannot fight. He thought about the other scholarship students at Westfield, the ones who kept their heads down and endured the daily humiliations because they had no choice. He thought about the younger kids at the community center, the ones who looked up to him as proof that someone from their neighborhood could make it in the wider world. By morning, he had made a decision. He wouldn't run from Tyler Morrison and his privileged friends. He would stand his ground, but he would do it smart. He would document everything, build a case, and when the time came, he would be ready. The next few weeks brought an escalation in Tyler's campaign of harassment. It started small. Books knocked from Marcus's hands, accidental bumps in the hallway, snide comments during class. But Tyler was getting bolder, more public in his attacks. During lunch one day, Tyler stood up at his table and announced loudly, I heard Scholarship Boy here thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Maybe we should test that theory. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Hey Marcus, what's the square root of 144? 12, Marcus replied automatically, not looking up from his book. Wow, a calculator with legs, Tyler laughed. How about this one? What's the formula for kinetic energy? Marcus finally looked up, recognizing the trap, but deciding to spring it anyway. 1/2 mv squared, mass times velocity squared, divided by 2. Show off, Brandon chimed in. I bet you think you're better than us. I think I'm different from you, Marcus replied carefully. And I think that's okay. Different, Tyler repeated mockingly. Is that what we're calling it? Here I thought you were just another charity case. The cafeteria had gone quiet, dozens of phones now recording the confrontation. Marcus felt the weight of their stares, the hunger for drama that seemed to fuel social media culture. But he also felt something else, the calm certainty that Master Chen had taught him to find in moments of crisis. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. I'm not here for your entertainment, Tyler. I'm here to learn. Learn what? How to be white? Tyler's voice was rising, his cruelty becoming more obvious to the watching crowd. How to be better than you, Marcus replied quietly, and the simplicity of the statement hit like a physical blow. Tyler's face went red with rage. He stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists, but Marcus didn't move. He simply stood there, calm and unafraid, and somehow that made Tyler look smaller by comparison. "You think you're tough?" Tyler hissed. "You think those glasses make you look smart? You're nothing but a—" "That's enough." The voice came from behind Tyler, and everyone turned to see Dr. Harrison standing in the doorway of the cafeteria. Her face was stern, her eyes flashing with anger. "Mr. Morrison, step away from Mr. Thompson immediately." Tyler's jaw clenched, but he knew better than to openly defy a teacher. He stepped back, his hands still clenched into fists. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is," Dr. Harrison said firmly. "All of you back to your tables. Now." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, but Marcus could see the phone still recording, the hungry eyes still watching. Tyler's humiliation in front of the entire cafeteria had only made him more dangerous. After school, Marcus found Dr. Harrison waiting by his locker. Her expression was concerned, almost maternal. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Marcus nodded, though they both knew it was a lie. "I can handle Tyler." "I'm sure you can," she said. "But you shouldn't have to. I've spoken to the administration about today's incident." And Dr. Harrison's expression grew grim. "They're calling it a minor disagreement between students. Tyler's father is a major donor to the school, and his mother is on the board of trustees. The administration is reluctant to take action." Marcus felt his heart sink, though he wasn't surprised. This was how the system worked. Privilege protected privilege, while everyone else was left to fend for themselves. "What should I do?" he asked. Dr. Harrison looked around nervously, then lowered her voice. "Document everything. Keep a record of every incident, every witness, every detail. Build a case that's so strong they can't ignore it." Marcus nodded, understanding the subtext. The system wouldn't protect him, but it might eventually be forced to acknowledge the truth if he gathered enough evidence. That evening, he started a journal, writing down every detail he could remember about Tyler's harassment. He also began carrying a small digital recorder, discreetly documenting the daily incidents that had become part of his school experience. The harassment escalated over the following weeks. Tyler seemed to take Marcus's calm response as a challenge, pushing harder to get a reaction. He started spreading rumors about Marcus's family, his background, his reasons for being at Westfield. The stories grew more elaborate and more cruel with each retelling. One particularly bad day, Marcus found his locker vandalized with racist graffiti. The words were ugly, meant to wound and humiliate. But instead of breaking down, Marcus photographed the damage and reported it to the administration. The response was predictable. "We take these incidents very seriously," Assistant Principal Morrison, Tyler's uncle, assured him. "We'll investigate thoroughly." But the cameras in that hallway were mysteriously malfunctioning, and no witnesses came forward. Marcus was beginning to understand that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. The question was, what could he do about it? The vandalism of Marcus's locker marked a turning point. What had started as typical bullying was evolving into something darker, more systematic. Tyler's campaign against him was becoming more organized, more public, and more dangerous. The next incident came during gym class, where the casual cruelty of adolescence could hide behind the mask of athletic competition. Coach Reynolds, a former college football player whose best days were clearly behind him, had always favored the popular kids. Tyler and his friends were stars of the school's lacrosse team, while Marcus had quietly declined to participate in organized sports, preferring to focus on his studies and his martial arts training. "Today, we're doing wrestling," Coach Reynolds announced, his voice echoing in the gymnasium. "I want everyone to find a partner of similar size and weight." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. In a fair world, he would have been matched with someone appropriate for his skill level. But Westfield Academy wasn't a fair world, and Coach Reynolds was about to prove it. "Morrison, you're with Thompson," the coach announced, and Marcus saw Tyler's face light up with malicious glee. "Coach, I don't think that's a good match," Marcus said carefully. Tyler was built like a linebacker, with 40 pounds of muscle on Marcus's lean frame. "Are you refusing to participate, Thompson?" Coach Reynolds asked, his voice carrying a warning tone. Marcus looked around the gym, seeing the other students watching with the same hungry anticipation they'd shown in the cafeteria. Some were already pulling out phones, ready to record whatever was about to happen. "No, sir," Marcus replied quietly. "I'll participate. What happened next was less wrestling than it was systematic humiliation. Tyler used his size advantage to slam Marcus to the mat repeatedly, each takedown harder than the last. But Marcus noticed something that Tyler and Coach Reynolds missed. The technique was sloppy, driven by anger rather than skill. After the third particularly brutal takedown, Marcus made a decision. As Tyler rushed at him again, Marcus stepped aside at the last second, using Tyler's momentum against him. Tyler went sprawling across the mat, his face twisted with surprise and rage. "Lucky shot," Tyler muttered, getting back to his feet. But it hadn't been luck, and Marcus knew it. Years of training with Master Chen had taught him to read his opponent's movements, to find the spaces between attacks, to turn aggression into vulnerability. The question was, should he use that knowledge? Marcus glanced at the watching crowd, at the phones recording every moment, at Coach Reynolds' approving nod when Tyler scored his points. He thought about his grandmother's words about representing everyone who looked like him, about Master Chen's teaching that sometimes a warrior must stand and fight. The next time Tyler rushed at him, Marcus was ready. He used a simple hip throw that sent Tyler flying across the mat, landing hard on his back. The gym went silent, the only sound Tyler's labored breathing as he struggled to get his wind back. "Beginner's luck," Coach Reynolds said quickly, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Tyler got up slowly, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You're going to pay for that," he whispered, low enough that only Marcus could hear. The rest of the class passed in tense silence. Marcus had shown a glimpse of his real abilities, but he knew that revealing too much would only make things worse. Tyler's humiliation in front of his peers had escalated the conflict to a new level. After class, Marcus found himself surrounded by Tyler's friends in the locker room. Brandon and Jake flanked him while Tyler stood directly in front, his face still flushed with anger. "That was cute," Tyler said, his voice dangerously quiet. "But gym class is one thing. The real world is another. This is the real world," Marcus replied, not backing down despite being outnumbered 3-1. "No," Tyler said, stepping closer. "The real world is where people like you know their place, and your place is at the bottom." Marcus felt his training kick in, his body automatically shifting into a defensive stance. But he also heard Master Chen's voice in his head. "The wise warrior avoids battles he doesn't need to fight." "I'm not looking for trouble," Marcus said quietly. "Too bad," Tyler replied, "because trouble found you." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of other students, but Marcus could see the promise of violence in Tyler's eyes. This was escalating beyond verbal harassment into something potentially dangerous. That afternoon, Marcus stopped by Dr. Harrison's classroom after school. She was grading papers, her desk lamp casting a warm circle of light in the otherwise dim room. "How are you holding up?" she asked, looking up from her work. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the student chairs. "Tyler's getting worse. I think he's planning something." Dr. Harrison's expression grew concerned. "Have you reported the escalation to the administration?" "I've tried," Marcus said. "But they keep saying it's just boys being boys. Assistant Principal Morrison seems to think his nephew is just showing school spirit." "That's his nephew?" Dr. Harrison's face showed genuine surprise. "Tyler Morrison, son of board member Patricia Morrison, nephew of Assistant Principal Robert Morrison," Marcus recited. "Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting the entire system." "Doctor." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. "I have an idea. There's someone you should meet." She dialed a number, and after a brief conversation, she hung up and smiled. "Can you stay after school tomorrow? I want to introduce you to someone who might be able to help." The next day, Marcus found himself in Dr. Harrison's classroom facing a woman he didn't recognize. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and the kind of quiet authority that came from years of fighting difficult battles. "Marcus, this is Maria Santos," Dr. Harrison said. "She's a civil rights attorney who specializes in educational discrimination cases." Ms. Santos shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Dr. Harrison tells me you're dealing with some serious harassment at school." Marcus nodded, feeling a mixture of hope and skepticism. "I've been documenting everything, but the administration doesn't seem to care." "That's actually not uncommon," Ms. Santos said. "Private schools often have their own internal cultures that can be resistant to change. But there are legal protections in place, and sometimes the threat of litigation can be very motivating." She spent the next hour going through Marcus's documentation, asking detailed questions about each incident. Her expression grew more serious as the story unfolded. "This is substantial," she said finally. "You have a clear pattern of racially motivated harassment, institutional indifference, and what appears to be active protection of the perpetrators. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Marcus thought about his grandmother's words about picking battles, about Master Chen's teaching that warriors fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. "I want it to stop," he said. "Not just for me, but for everyone." Ms. Santos nodded. "That's going to require exposing the truth in a way that the school can't ignore or cover up. Are you prepared for that fight?" "I've been preparing for it my whole life," Marcus replied. They spent the rest of the meeting developing a strategy. Mrs. Santos would work behind the scenes to build a legal case, while Marcus would continue documenting incidents and looking for opportunities to expose the truth. She also gave him a small, high-quality recording device that would capture both audio and video discreetly. "Remember," she said as they prepared to leave, "your goal isn't just to win a fight, it's to create lasting change. Sometimes that requires patience and strategy rather than immediate action." Marcus understood, but patience was becoming harder to maintain. Tyler's harassment was becoming more public, more humiliating, and more dangerous. The other students were starting to treat Marcus like a pariah, afraid of becoming targets themselves if they showed him any support. The breaking point came during lunch on a Friday afternoon. Marcus was sitting alone at his usual table, working on homework and trying to ignore the whispered comments and pointed stares from across the cafeteria. Tyler and his friends were holding court at their table, their voices growing louder and more animated as they fed off each other's energy. "I heard Scholarship Boy thinks he's some kind of martial arts expert," Tyler announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Maybe he learned kung fu from watching movies." The casual racism of the comment made Marcus's jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain calm. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, phones being discreetly positioned to record whatever was about to happen. Tyler stood up and walked over to Marcus's table, his friends following like a pack of wolves. "Hey Bruce Lee, why don't you show us some of those moves?" Marcus looked up from his homework, his voice steady and calm. "I'm trying to eat lunch." "Come on, don't be shy," Tyler pressed, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "I bet you can't even break a board with those skinny arms." "I'm not here to entertain you," Marcus replied, returning to his homework. But Tyler wasn't done. He reached out and knocked Marcus's textbook off the table, sending it sliding across the floor. "I'm talking to you, boy." The word hung in the air like a slap. Marcus felt every head in the cafeteria turn toward them, felt the sudden silence that followed Tyler's casual use of a term loaded with centuries of oppression and violence. Marcus stood up slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. "What did you just call me?" Tyler's face showed a moment of uncertainty. He hadn't meant to be quite so obvious in his racism, but his friends were watching, the phones were recording, and backing down would mean losing face. "You heard me," Tyler said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a door opening that he'd kept carefully locked. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been reduced to that single hateful word. It was about his grandmother, who had faced down racism with dignity and strength. It was about Master Chen, who had taught him that sometimes the warrior must stand and fight. "Say it again," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Tyler looked around nervously, suddenly aware that the situation was spinning out of his control. The cafeteria was completely silent now, dozens of phones recording every word. "I said you heard me," Tyler repeated, but his voice was weaker now. Marcus stepped closer, his movements fluid and controlled. "No, I want you to say it again, loud enough for everyone to hear." Tyler's face went red, caught between his desire to back down and his need to maintain his image in front of his friends. "I don't have to repeat myself for you." "Then let me be clear," Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the cafeteria. "I'm not your boy. I'm not your entertainment. And I'm not your victim." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler's friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing that their leader was losing control of the situation. But Tyler was too proud and too stupid to back down. "We'll see about that," Tyler snarled and lunged forward. "This is about to get intense. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because stories like this one show us what real strength looks like. What's your prediction for how this ends? Drop it in the comments below." What happened next lasted only seconds, but it felt like slow motion to Marcus. Tyler's attack was clumsy, driven by anger rather than technique. Marcus sidestepped easily, using Tyler's momentum against him with a simple redirect that sent the bigger boy stumbling past. Tyler spun around, his face twisted with rage, and swung wildly. Marcus ducked under the punch and responded with a controlled strike to Tyler's solar plexus. Not hard enough to cause serious damage, but enough to double him over and leave him gasping for breath. "Stop," Marcus said quietly, his hands raised in a defensive position. "This doesn't have to continue." But Tyler was beyond reason now. He straightened up and rushed forward again, this time with Brandon and Jake joining the attack. Marcus found himself facing 3 opponents in the middle of the school cafeteria, dozens of phones recording every moment. This was the moment Master Chen had prepared him for. Not just the physical confrontation, but the mental and emotional challenge of fighting without becoming consumed by anger. Marcus moved with fluid grace, using the principles he'd learned over years of training. He redirected Brandon's charge with a simple hip throw, sending him sliding across the cafeteria floor. Jake hesitated, suddenly realizing that this wasn't going to be the easy beating they'd planned. Tyler attacked again, his punches wild and undisciplined. Marcus blocked the first punch, deflected the second, and responded with a controlled strike to Tyler's wrist that made him cry out in pain. But Marcus wasn't trying to hurt them. He was trying to stop them, to end the confrontation without causing permanent damage. "That's enough." The voice belonged to Coach Reynolds, who had finally arrived to break up the fight. But by then, it was already over. Tyler was on the ground, holding his wrist and breathing heavily. Brandon was slowly picking himself up from across the room. Jake was standing frozen, his eyes wide with shock. Marcus stood in the center of the cafeteria, his uniform slightly disheveled but otherwise unmarked. He wasn't even breathing hard. "All of you, to the principal's office. Now," Coach Reynolds commanded, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. This wasn't the outcome he'd expected. The walk to the principal's office was surreal. Marcus could feel the eyes of every student in the hallway following him, could hear the whispered conversations and the sound of phones buzzing with notifications as videos of the fight spread across social media. Principal Davidson was waiting in his office, along with Assistant Principal Morrison and Tyler's mother, Patricia Morrison. The board member was an elegant woman in her 50s, with the kind of cold beauty that suggested she'd never known a day of hardship in her life. "Mr. Thompson," Principal Davidson began, "I understand there was an altercation in the cafeteria." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, keeping his voice respectful, despite the anger burning in his chest. "My son says you attacked him unprovoked," Mrs. Morrison interjected, her voice sharp with accusation. Marcus looked at Tyler, who was sitting in the corner with his wrist wrapped in ice. Their eyes met, and Marcus saw something unexpected there. Not just anger, but fear. "That's not what happened," Marcus said quietly. "Then why don't you tell us what did happen?" Principal Davidson said, though his tone suggested he'd already made up his mind. Marcus recounted the events truthfully, his voice steady and calm. He explained Tyler's use of racist language, the escalation of the confrontation, and his attempts to de-escalate before the physical altercation began. "That's a lie," Mrs. Morrison said sharply. "My son would never use that kind of language." "There were dozens of witnesses," Marcus replied, "and phones recording the entire incident." Assistant Principal Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, are you saying you have martial arts training?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, sensing the trap but unwilling to lie. "And you use that training against students who don't have similar skills?" "I used it to defend myself against 3 attackers," Marcus corrected. "3 attackers?" Mrs. Morrison's voice was incredulous. "My son is injured, Mr. Thompson. He may need medical attention." Marcus looked at Tyler again, noting the way he was favoring his wrist. "I hope he's okay. I never intended to hurt anyone." "Intended or not, you used excessive force," Principal Davidson said. "I'm afraid we have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation." "And what about Tyler?" Marcus asked. "What about the racist language? What about the fact that he started the fight?" "We'll investigate all aspects of this incident," Principal Davidson assured him, but Marcus could see the lie in his eyes. As Marcus gathered his things and prepared to leave, he caught a glimpse of Tyler's face. The fear was still there, but there was something else too, a recognition that the dynamics between them had fundamentally changed. Marcus called his grandmother from the school parking lot, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "Grandma, I need you to come pick me up. and you might want to call Mrs. Santos. That evening, the Thompson house was a whirlwind of activity. Sarah Thompson sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, reviewing the videos that had already begun circulating on social media. Mrs. Santos was on her way over, and Marcus could hear his grandmother making phone calls to allies in the civil rights community. "Baby, come look at this," Sarah called out, her voice excited. Marcus looked over her shoulder at the laptop screen, where a video of the cafeteria incident was playing. But it wasn't just any video. It was a clear, high-quality recording that captured every moment of the confrontation, including Tyler's use of racist language and his initial attack. "Where did this come from?" Marcus asked, surprised by the quality and angle of the footage. "A student named Emily Chen uploaded it," Sarah said, scrolling through the comments. She wrote a whole post about witnessing months of harassment and finally deciding to speak up. Marcus felt a surge of hope. Emily was in his AP Physics class, a quiet girl who had never spoken to him directly, but who had always seemed sympathetic to his situation. The fact that she had not only recorded the incident but was willing to publicly support him was unexpected and incredibly meaningful. Ms. Santos arrived an hour later, her briefcase full of legal documents and her expression grimly determined. She watched the video several times, taking notes and asking detailed questions about the context. "This changes everything," she said finally. "We have clear evidence of racially motivated harassment, documentation of the school's failure to intervene, and now video proof of both the racist language and the fact that you were defending yourself against multiple attackers. What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we go on the offensive," Ms. Santos replied. "I'm going to file a formal complaint with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, and I'm going to demand a meeting with the school board. If they want to play hardball, we'll show them what real hardball looks like." The next few days were a blur of activity. The video went viral on social media, spreading far beyond Westfield Academy's insular community. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as another example of institutional racism in elite private schools. Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight in a way he'd never wanted or expected. But the attention also brought support. Former Westfield students reached out to share their own experiences with discrimination. Civil rights organizations offered their assistance. Most importantly, other current students began speaking up, sharing stories of harassment and institutional indifference that painted a picture of systemic problems at the school. Dr. Harrison called Marcus at home on Tuesday evening, her voice excited and hopeful. "Marcus, you need to see the news. Channel 7 is running a full investigation into discrimination at Westfield. They've interviewed a dozen current and former students, and the picture they're painting isn't pretty." Marcus turned on the television to see a familiar face on screen. Jamal Washington, a black student who had graduated from Westfield 2 years earlier. Marcus remembered him as a quiet, studious kid who had kept his head down and endured whatever came his way. "The harassment was constant," Jamal was saying to the reporter. "Racial slurs, jokes about affirmative action, exclusion from social events. The administration knew what was happening, but they never did anything meaningful to stop it." The report featured several other former students, each sharing similar experiences. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Westfield Academy had a culture problem that went far beyond Marcus's individual situation. Master Chen had been following the story closely, and Marcus found him in the dojo that evening, moving through slow, meditative forms. The old man's face was serene, but Marcus could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "You have shown great wisdom," Master Chen said, as Marcus joined him in practice. "You fought when fighting was necessary, but you fought with purpose, not anger." "I don't feel wise," Marcus admitted. "I feel like everything is spinning out of control." "Control is an illusion," Master Chen replied. "What matters is how we respond when we cannot control the outcome. You have chosen to stand for something larger than yourself. That is the mark of a true warrior." They practiced together in comfortable silence, the familiar movements helping Marcus find his center amid the chaos of media attention and legal proceedings. When they finished, Master Chen placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Remember," he said quietly, "this fight is not just about you. It is about all the students who will come after you, all the young people who deserve to learn in an environment free from hatred and fear. You are fighting for them now." Wednesday brought the school board meeting that Ms. Santos had demanded. The boardroom at Westfield Academy was packed with reporters, parents, students, and community activists. Marcus sat between his grandmother and Ms. Santos, trying to project calm confidence despite the butterflies in his stomach. Board chair. William Harrison, Dr. Harrison's husband, Marcus realized with surprise, called the meeting to order. His expression was grim as he surveyed the packed room. We're here today to address serious allegations regarding the treatment of students at Westfield Academy, he began. Before we hear from the legal representatives, I want to state clearly that this board takes all allegations of discrimination seriously. Ms. Santos stood when called upon, her presentation crisp and devastating. She laid out the timeline of harassment, the documentation of institutional indifference, and the clear evidence of racial bias. She played excerpts from the cafeteria video, highlighting Tyler's use of racist language and the administration's subsequent attempt to blame Marcus for the confrontation. This isn't an isolated incident, she concluded. This is a pattern of behavior that has been allowed to fester because it involves students from influential families targeting those with less social power. Westfield Academy has created a hostile environment for students of color, and it's time for that to change. When she finished, Board Chair Harrison called for questions from the board members. Patricia Morrison, Tyler's mother, was notably silent, her face pale and drawn. Other board members asked pointed questions about the school's disciplinary policies and diversity initiatives. Finally, they called for public comment. One by one, current and former students stepped forward to share their experiences. The stories were heartbreaking. Talented young people who had been made to feel unwelcome in their own school, who had suffered in silence because they feared retaliation or disbelief. Emily Chen was among those who spoke, her voice shaking but determined. I've watched Marcus Thompson endure months of harassment, she said. I've seen him handle it with more grace and dignity than his tormentors deserved. The administration knew what was happening, and they chose to look the other way because it was easier than confronting uncomfortable truths about our school's culture. When the public comment period ended, the board retired for a private deliberation that lasted nearly 2 hours. When they returned, Board Chair Harrison's expression was solemn. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, he began, this board finds that Westfield Academy has failed to maintain an environment free from racial harassment and discrimination. Effective immediately, we are implementing the following changes. The list was comprehensive. Mandatory diversity training for all faculty and staff, revision of disciplinary policies to ensure equal treatment, establishment of an independent ombudsman to investigate harassment complaints, and a full review of the school's culture and practices by an outside consulting firm. Additionally, Board Chair Harrison continued, we are rescinding the suspension of Marcus Thompson and extending a formal apology for the school's failure to protect him from harassment. We are also announcing the resignation of Assistant Principal Robert Morrison, whose handling of these incidents fell far short of our standards. Marcus felt his grandmother's hand squeeze his arm, felt Ms. Santos's satisfied smile beside him. But the biggest surprise came next. Finally, the board chair said, we are announcing the establishment of the Marcus Thompson Scholarship Fund, which will provide full academic scholarships to deserving students from underrepresented communities, along with comprehensive support services to ensure their success at Westfield Academy. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus felt overwhelmed rather than triumphant. This was more than he had ever expected, more change than he had dared to hope for. As the meeting broke up, Marcus found himself surrounded by supporters and reporters. But through the crowd, he caught sight of Tyler Morrison, standing alone near the back of the room. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Marcus saw something he'd never seen before in Tyler's face: genuine remorse. The days following the school board meeting brought a strange new reality to Westfield Academy. Marcus returned to find a campus transformed by scrutiny and uncomfortable self-reflection. The mandatory diversity training had begun, reporters still lingered near the gates, and conversations that had once been whispered were now happening in the open. But the most significant change was in the students themselves. The viral video had forced everyone to confront the ugly realities that had been hiding beneath Westfield's polished surface. Some students doubled down on their prejudices, muttering about political correctness and reverse racism, but others began to speak up in ways they never had before. Marcus found himself at the center of a transformation he'd never asked for, but was determined to see through. Walking through the hallways, he noticed the difference immediately. Some students looked at him with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and yes, some with resentment, but no one looked through him anymore. Emily Chen approached him at his locker on his first day back. her usual shyness replaced by quiet determination. "I wanted to apologize," she said without preamble. "For what?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "For staying silent for so long. For watching you go through all that harassment and not speaking up until it exploded into violence." Her voice carried genuine regret. "I was a coward." Marcus shook his head. "You weren't a coward. You were surviving. I understand that." "No," Emily insisted. "There's a difference between surviving and complicity. I chose complicity because it was easier. But watching you stand up to Tyler, seeing how you handled everything with such dignity, it made me realize that silence isn't neutral. It's choosing the side of the oppressor." Her words hit Marcus harder than he expected. Here was validation that his choice to fight back had been about more than just his own situation. It had inspired others to find their own courage. "Thank you," he said simply, "for recording the video, for speaking at the board meeting. That took real courage." Emily smiled, the first genuine smile he'd ever seen from her. "We should start a club, Students for Social Justice or something. Make sure these changes actually stick." The idea intrigued Marcus. Real change would require sustained effort, ongoing vigilance to ensure that the school's new policies weren't just window dressing. Dr. Harrison was waiting for him when he arrived at AP Physics, her face bright with something that looked like pride mixed with relief. "How does it feel to be back?" she asked as students filed into the classroom. "Different," Marcus replied honestly. "Everything feels different. Change is never comfortable," she said, "but it's necessary. You've started something important here, Marcus. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The class proceeded normally, but Marcus noticed subtle differences. Students who had never spoken to him before made eye contact, offered small smiles. The wall of indifference that had surrounded him for months was finally beginning to crack. Lunch remained the most challenging part of the day, but even that was evolving. Marcus still sat at his usual table, but he was no longer alone. Emily had joined him, along with David Rodriguez, a sophomore who had been quietly enduring his own share of harassment, and Sarah Kim, a senior who had transferred from Korea the previous year and struggled with both academic and social integration. "This is weird," David admitted, looking around the cafeteria. "I've never sat anywhere but the corner table by the kitchen." "We're all refugees from different forms of exile," Sarah observed with a wry smile. "Maybe it's time we stopped accepting exile as normal." Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Tyler Morrison approached their table slowly, his left wrist still wrapped in a brace from their confrontation. The cafeteria quieted as students noticed the interaction, phones discreetly angled to capture whatever was about to happen. Marcus tensed, his body automatically shifting into a defensive posture, but Tyler held up his uninjured hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Tyler said, his voice lacking its usual arrogant confidence. "I wanted to talk to you, privately, if possible." Marcus studied Tyler's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden aggression. What he saw instead was something he'd never expected to see from Tyler Morrison: genuine uncertainty and what might have been shame. "We can talk here," Marcus said finally. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my friends." Tyler glanced around at the watching students, then back at Marcus. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. The things I said, the way I treated you. It was wrong." The words hung in the air like a foreign language. Marcus felt his friends tense beside him, felt the weight of dozens of watching eyes. This could be another humiliation, another trap designed to make him look foolish. "Why now?" Marcus asked carefully. Tyler's face reddened, but he pressed on. "Because my parents made me watch the video, made me listen to the things I said, see the way I acted. And then they made me watch the news reports, the interviews with other students who went through the same thing." He paused, his voice dropping. "I didn't know. I knew I was being a jerk, but I didn't understand what it actually meant." What meant?" Emily asked, her voice sharp with skepticism. "The constant harassment, the way it builds up day after day until you feel like you don't belong anywhere." Tyler looked directly at Marcus. "I made you feel like you didn't belong here. But this is your school too. You earned your place here just like everyone else." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at the pain Tyler had caused, surprise at the apparent sincerity of his apology, and something that might have been compassion for the obvious discomfort Tyler was experiencing. "Apologies are easy," Marcus said finally. "What are you going to do differently?" I don't know yet, Tyler admitted, but I want to learn. My mom is making me do community service at a civil rights organization downtown, and I'm going to start speaking up when I hear other people saying the kind of stuff I used to say. It wasn't enough. Nothing could undo months of systematic harassment, but it was a beginning. Marcus nodded slowly. We'll see. Tyler started to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, you could have really hurt me in that fight. Brandon and Jake too. But you didn't. You just stopped us. That says something about who you are. After Tyler left, the table sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, David spoke up. Think he means it? I think he's scared, Sarah said pragmatically. The whole school culture is changing, and kids like Tyler are realizing they can't act the same way anymore. Maybe that's enough for now, Marcus said thoughtfully. Fear of consequences can lead to changed behavior, and changed behavior can eventually lead to changed attitudes. Emily looked skeptical. You're being awfully generous to someone who made your life hell. Marcus thought about Master Chen's teachings, about the difference between justice and revenge. I'm not being generous. I'm being strategic. If Tyler actually changes, he becomes an ally instead of an enemy. And allies are more useful than defeated enemies. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Principal Davidson, who approached their table with the nervous energy of someone delivering potentially unwelcome news. Mr. Thompson, I'd like to speak with you in my office when you have a moment, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Despite the board's public support, he still didn't trust the administration. Is there a problem? No problem, Principal Davidson assured him. Actually, I have a proposition for you. An hour later, Marcus found himself in the principal's office, facing a proposal he'd never expected. Principal Davidson wanted him to serve as a student representative on the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee, working directly with faculty and administration to implement the board's mandated changes. You understand this institution's problems better than most, Principal Davidson explained, and you've shown remarkable maturity in how you've handled an incredibly difficult situation. We need student voices in this process, and your voice in particular. Marcus considered the offer carefully. It was an opportunity to ensure that the changes were real and meaningful, not just cosmetic adjustments designed to appease critics, but it also meant becoming even more visible, taking on additional responsibility at a time when he was already struggling to balance his academic work with the ongoing legal and media attention. I'll do it, he said finally, but I have conditions. Principal Davidson raised an eyebrow. Such as? First, the committee has to include other students who've experienced harassment, not just me. Second, we need to have real decision-making power, not just advisory roles. And third, the committee's work has to be transparent. Regular reports to the school community about what we're doing and what progress we're making. Those seem like reasonable conditions, Principal Davidson agreed, though Marcus could see him making mental notes about the level of organization and strategic thinking in Marcus's response. That evening, Marcus shared the day's events with his grandmother and Master Chen, both of whom had become regular fixtures in his post-crisis life. They sat in the Thompson family kitchen, sharing takeout Chinese food and dissecting the complex dynamics of institutional change. You're being offered a seat at the table, Sarah observed. That's significant. But remember, they're offering it because they have to, not because they want to. Don't let them use your presence to legitimize cosmetic changes. Master Chen nodded in agreement. The student who becomes the teacher must be careful not to lose sight of why he began learning in the first place. You sought to survive, then to defend yourself, then to create change. Do not let the process of change become more important than the goal of justice. Marcus appreciated their wisdom, but he was also beginning to understand that the situation was more complex than either revenge or reconciliation. Real change would require sustained effort, political skill, and the ability to work with people who had been complicit in the problems he was trying to solve. The first meeting of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee took place the following week in the school's boardroom. Marcus arrived to find an eclectic group assembled around the polished conference table. Dr. Harrison and 2 other faculty members, a parent representative, Board Chair Harrison, and 3 other students besides himself. One of the students was Jamal Washington, the recent graduate who had spoken so powerfully at the board meeting. Another was Sarah Kim from his lunch table. The third was someone Marcus hadn't expected to see, Brandon Chen, Tyler's former sidekick. Before we begin, Board Chair Harrison announced, I want to address the elephant in the room. Some of you may be surprised to see Brandon Chen on this committee, given his involvement in recent incidents. Brandon specifically requested to be included, and he's written a letter explaining his perspective that I'd like him to share. Brandon stood nervously, a piece of paper shaking in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want to apologize to Marcus, and to everyone else who's been hurt by the culture at this school, he began. I went along with Tyler's behavior because I was scared of becoming a target myself. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I've been the only Asian student in my grade since freshman year, and I thought if I aligned myself with Tyler, I'd be protected. He paused, gathering courage to continue. But what I learned is that being protected by a system that hurts other people just makes you complicit in that hurt. I want to be part of the solution now, not part of the problem. Marcus studied Brandon's face, looking for signs of deception or calculated manipulation. What he saw was genuine remorse and something else, recognition of shared experience. Brandon had been trying to survive in the same hostile environment, just using different strategies. Thank you for that, Marcus said simply, and saw Brandon's shoulders relax slightly. The committee's work over the following weeks was intensive and often frustrating. They reviewed disciplinary policies, examined the curriculum for bias and exclusion, and conducted focus groups with students from various backgrounds. What emerged was a picture of an institution that had been structured to serve a narrow demographic while tolerating the marginalization of everyone else. But they also found reasons for hope. The mandatory diversity training, while initially met with resistance, was beginning to generate meaningful conversations. The new ombudsman position had been filled by a respected civil rights attorney who was taking complaints seriously and investigating them thoroughly. Most importantly, the student body itself was changing. Emily's proposed Students for Social Justice Club had been approved and was attracting members from across demographic lines. Tyler Morrison had not only joined the club but had become one of its most active members, using his social status to encourage other popular students to participate. The transformation wasn't universal or instantaneous. There were still incidents of harassment, still pockets of resistance to change. But the incidents were now being reported and addressed rather than ignored. The culture of silence that had protected perpetrators was beginning to crack. One afternoon in late November, Marcus found himself alone in the dojo with Master Chen, working through advanced forms that required perfect balance and complete mental focus. The physical demands of the practice helped clear his mind of the complexities and frustrations of committee work. You are troubled, Master Chen observed as they cooled down. Not troubled exactly, Marcus replied, but I'm starting to understand how hard real change is. It's not like a martial arts tournament where there's a clear winner and loser. It's more like gardening. You plant seeds and tend them, but you can't force them to grow. Master Chen smiled. An excellent analogy. And what have you learned about tending this particular garden? Marcus thought carefully before answering. That you have to work with the soil you have, not the soil you wish you had. Some people like Tyler are ready to change when they're confronted with the consequences of their actions. Others need more time, more education, more pressure, and some may never change at all. And how do you maintain your own integrity while working with people who may have harmed you or others like you? It was the question Marcus had been wrestling with for weeks. How do you fight for justice while working alongside people who had been complicit in injustice? How do you trust former enemies to become allies? I think, Marcus said slowly, that you focus on behavior rather than beliefs. I may never know if Tyler really understands why his actions were wrong, or if he's just learned to act differently because the consequences changed. But if he's acting differently, protecting other students instead of harming them, then the result is the same. Master Chen nodded approvingly. Wisdom often lies in accepting what we cannot control while maximizing our influence over what we can control. You cannot change hearts, but you can change systems. You cannot guarantee transformation, but you can demand accountability. The final test of the school's commitment to change came in December, when Marcus witnessed an incident that reminded him why the work was necessary. He was walking through the hallway when he saw a new student, a young Latina girl who had transferred mid-semester, being harassed by a group of older students. The harassment was subtle, accidental bumps, whispered comments, the kind of psychological warfare that left no physical evidence. A few months earlier, Marcus would have kept walking, unwilling to risk making himself a target. But now he had allies, institutional support, And most importantly, the confidence that comes from knowing you're not fighting alone. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, approaching the group with the kind of calm authority he'd learned from Master Chen. The lead harasser, a junior named Chad Whitman, turned with a sneer. "Nothing that concerns you, Thompson. Actually, anything that happens to students at this school concerns me," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and harassment of any student is exactly the kind of thing we're supposed to address." The mention of the committee caused visible discomfort among the harassers. The new institutional structures were having their intended effect, creating consequences for behavior that had previously been tolerated. "We weren't harassing anyone," Chad protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then you won't mind if I walk with—" Marcus looked at the new student questioningly. "Sophia," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight accent. "If I walk with Sophia to her next class," Marcus continued, "just to make sure there are no more accidents." Chad and his friends exchanged uncertain glances, then melted away without further confrontation. The new reality at Westfield was that harassment now carried real risks, and most bullies were fundamentally cowards who only attacked when they felt safe from consequences. As Marcus walked Sophia to her class, she thanked him quietly. "I was starting to think this school was going to be like my old one," she admitted. "It was," Marcus said honestly, "but it's changing. And if anyone gives you trouble, report it immediately. Don't suffer in silence like I did." Sophia nodded gratefully, and Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction that was different from anything he'd experienced before. This was what real change looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but small acts of protection and solidarity that created space for everyone to learn and grow. The spring semester brought the culmination of the committee's work, a comprehensive report on the school's progress and recommendations for continued improvement. Marcus had spent countless hours crafting the document, determined to create something that would serve as a roadmap for lasting change. The report was unflinching in its assessment of past failures, while also acknowledging the genuine progress that had been made. It documented the 67% decrease in reported harassment incidents, the improved academic performance of underrepresented students, and the increased diversity in student leadership positions. But it also identified ongoing challenges: the need for continued faculty training, the importance of recruiting more diverse staff, and the necessity of maintaining vigilance against backsliding as the initial crisis faded from memory. The report's release coincided with a school-wide assembly where Marcus was invited to speak about his experience and the transformation he'd witnessed. Standing at the podium in the auditorium where he'd once felt so isolated, Marcus looked out at faces that now seemed genuinely attentive rather than dismissive. "8 months ago, I stood in this room feeling like I didn't belong," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I was told by other students that I was here to fill a quota, that I didn't deserve my place at Westfield Academy. Some of you believe that. Some of you probably still do." He paused, letting the uncomfortable truth settle over the audience. "But what I've learned is that belonging isn't something that's given to you by others. It's something you claim for yourself and then fight to protect for everyone else. I belong here not because someone else decided I deserve to be here, but because I refuse to accept that any student should have to choose between their dignity and their education." The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, but Marcus wasn't finished. "The changes we've made this year aren't permanent unless we make them permanent. Every incoming class, every new student, every moment when someone is faced with the choice between speaking up or staying silent. These are the moments that will determine whether Westfield Academy becomes the school it claims to be, or remains the school it has always been." After the assembly, Marcus was surrounded by students, teachers, and even some parents who wanted to share their own stories and express their support. But the moment that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Tyler Morrison approached him as the crowd was dispersing, his expression serious but not hostile. "I wanted you to know," Tyler said quietly, "that I'm going to State University next year instead of Princeton. My parents think I'm crazy, but I want to go somewhere that I earned my way into, not somewhere I got into because of my last name." Marcus nodded, recognizing the significance of Tyler's decision. "That sounds like the right choice for you." "I also wanted to ask you something," Tyler continued. "Would you be willing to speak at the community service organization where I've been volunteering? There are other kids there who are dealing with the same kind of attitudes I used to have. Maybe hearing your story would help them the way it helped me." It was a request Marcus hadn't expected, but it felt like a natural extension of the work he'd been doing. "I'd be happy to do that." As Tyler walked away, Marcus felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with victory or defeat. The boy who had once tormented him was becoming someone different, someone better. The institution that had failed to protect him was becoming more just. The community that had excluded him was becoming more inclusive. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was progress, real and measurable and sustainable. That evening, Marcus sat with his grandmother and Master Chen in the dojo, reflecting on the year's journey. The space that had once been his refuge from the world had become a launching pad for changing that world. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said simply. "Not because you won some kind of fight, but because you never lost sight of who you are or what you were fighting for." Master Chen placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "The student has become the teacher. But remember, a true teacher never stops learning. Your work is just beginning." Marcus understood. Westfield Academy was transformed, but there were other schools, other students, other systems that needed to change. His experience had given him tools and insights that could help others navigate their own battles for dignity and justice. 6 months later, Marcus gave the valedictory address at Westfield Academy's graduation ceremony. He spoke about the power of courage, the necessity of persistence, and the responsibility that comes with privilege, even the privilege of surviving injustice. In the audience, he could see his grandmother beaming with pride, Master Chen nodding approvingly, and Dr. Harrison wiping away tears. He could see Emily Chen, who would be taking over leadership of the Students for Social Justice Club. He could see Sophia Martinez, who had blossomed into a confident leader and advocate for other new students. And he could see Tyler Morrison, who was graduating not as valedictorian. That honor belonged to Marcus, but as someone who had learned that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. "We leave this place different than we found it," Marcus concluded his address. "Not just because we earned diplomas, but because we learned that education without justice is incomplete, that excellence without equity is hollow, and that belonging is something we create together, not something we hoard for ourselves." The standing ovation that followed felt different from all the others, not like recognition of individual achievement, but like acknowledgement of collective transformation. As Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the scared, isolated scholarship student to the confident young man who had helped transform an entire institution. It felt like a lifetime of growth compressed into a single year. But he also knew that the diploma in his hands represented not an ending, but a beginning. In the fall, he would be attending Stanford University on a full scholarship, planning to study both engineering and civil rights law. His goal was to use technology and legal advocacy to fight systemic injustice on a larger scale. Master Chen had taught him that a warrior's greatest victory is not defeating an enemy, but transforming an enemy into an ally. Tyler Morrison was proof that such transformation was possible. Westfield Academy was proof that institutions could change when held accountable. And Marcus Thompson was proof that one person, armed with courage, wisdom, and unwavering principles, could indeed change the world, one school, one student, one heart at a time. The bullies had targeted a black boy with glasses, dismissing him as weak and vulnerable. They had been unaware that they were facing not just a martial arts prodigy, but something far more dangerous. A young man who understood that true strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the courage to heal broken systems and create space for everyone to thrive. In the end, that had made all the difference. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.